They laughed at the flying milk bottle.
To the elite aces of the Luftwaffe, the self-proclaimed masters of the European sky, it was a joke, a flying milk bottle, a crude, ungainly blunder. When the American P47 Thunderbolt first lumbered into view over the skies of France in the spring of 1943, German pilots couldn't help but roar with laughter at its clumsy, bloated frame. This thing was enormous, weighing up to 8 tons, fully loaded, nearly double their nimble Focke-Wulf, 190 seconds. They figured this airborne juggernaut would be a slow, easy kill proof of what they saw as crude American engineering. We laughed. One German ace later admitted we made a terrible mistake. That laughter, echoing across the continent, would soon be violently silenced in a storm of steel. They would discover this milk bottle was not just filled with 850 caliber machine guns, but a revolutionary engine that owned the high altitudes and a toughness that bordered on the supernatural. They laughed at it right up until it started systematically wiping them from the sky. In early 1943, the air war over Europe was a lethal chess match, and the German Luftwaffe were its grand masters. Their fighters were finely honed blades, instruments of precision and speed that had dominated the skies for years. Into this arena of deadly artists came the American challenger, the Republic P47 Thunderbolt. And on first glance, it looked like a total bust. Even American pilots, many fresh out of flight school, took one look at the P47 and were aghast. When the first planes were assigned to fighter groups in England, like the famed 4th and 78th, the reaction was disbelief. Many of these guys had been flying the nimble British Spitfire, a thoroughbred of a fighter. The P47, by contrast, felt like a truck. Its immense weight had immediate and worrying consequences. A poor climb rate, a sluggish response, a hopeless performance in a classic turning dogfight. Pilots nicknamed it the Jug because its profile resembled a common milk jug. Its combat debut on April 8, 1943 was quite frankly a disaster. The early encounters were grim, with German pilots quickly learning to exploit its low-altitude weaknesses. The flying milk bottle seemed to be just what they thought, an oversized, underperforming flop. The laughter in Luftwaffe mess halls was genuine. They'd faced the best the Allies had, and this wasn't it. But what they failed to grasp was that the P47 wasn't designed for their kind of fight. It was designed for a whole new kind of war, and the joke they would soon discover was on them. What terrifying secret did this lumbering giant conceal? So why were the Germans so wrong? Because they were judging the Thunderbolt by their own standards, failing to look deeper and see the revolutionary heart of the beast. The P47's secrets weren't in its agility, but in its engine and the incredible system that fed it, allowing it to dominate where it mattered most, the frigid thin air above 25,000 feet. The first secret was the engine itself, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. This wasn't just an engine. It was a 2,000 horsepower monument of engineering that would eventually be pushed to over 2,800 horsepower with water injection. For comparison, the superb engine in the Bf-109 produced around 1,400 to 1,800 horsepower. The R2800 was, simply put, one of the most powerful piston engines of the war. Its radial design was also the key to the P-47's famous toughness. Unlike the liquid-cooled inline engines of the Spitfire, or Bf-109, a radial engine's cylinders are arranged in a circle. This created more drag, hence the P-47's bulky shape, but it also meant there was no fragile cooling system with long, vulnerable tubes carrying vital fluid. German pilots were used to seeing their cannon shells rip through an engine, sever a coolant line, and watch the plane fall from the sky. The R2800, however, was a different animal. It was air-cooled, and its sheer mass meant it could absorb an unbelievable amount of punishment. There are countless stories of P-47s returning to base with entire cylinders shot clean off, the engine still chugging along. But a powerful engine alone wasn't enough. At high altitudes, the air gets thin, starving an engine of oxygen. Most fighters used a gear-driven supercharger spun directly by the engine. This worked, but it was a parasite, robbing the engine of power, and its performance dropped off dramatically at high altitudes. Here's where the Thunderbolt's true secret weapon came in its General Electric turbo supercharger. Instead of being driven by the engine, the turbo was powered by the engine's own hot exhaust waste energy. A mind-bogglingly complex network of ducts snaked from the engine down the belly of the plane to a turbine in the rear fuselage. This turbine used the exhaust to spin a compressor at over 20 revolutions per minute, scooping up thin, cold air, pressurizing it, and ramming it back into the engine. The result was nothing short of miraculous. While German fighters with their mechanical superchargers began to gasp for air above 25,000 feet, the P-47's R-2800 was just hitting its stride. The turbo allowed the Thunderbolt to maintain its immense power all the way up to 30 feet and beyond. Up there in the realm of the high-altitude bombers it was built to protect, the clumsy Jug became a thoroughbred. It was fast, responsive, and packed with energy its German adversaries just couldn't match. The Luftwaffe aces were being drawn into a new battlefield where all their advantages were stripped away. The flying milk bottle was revealing its first terrifying secret. It wasn't built to dance. It was built to hunt in an environment where nothing else could breathe. If the P-47's engine was its heart, its armament was its soul. German pilots, used to a balanced philosophy of firepower and ammunition, were about to meet an aircraft built on a uniquely American principle: overwhelming, unadulterated firepower. The Thunderbolt carried a staggering 850 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing. This wasn't just a lot of guns. It was a flying artillery battery. With all 8 guns blazing, the P-47 could unleash over 100 rounds per second. Pilots didn't describe it as firing guns. They called it projecting a wall of lead. The ammunition load was just as massive, carrying up to 4,000 rounds. A Bf-109, by contrast, could exhaust its ammo in just a few short bursts. A Thunderbolt pilot could hold down the trigger for nearly 30 seconds of continuous fire. You didn't have to be a perfect shot. You just had to get the enemy somewhere in your sights and let the sheer volume of fire do the rest. The guns were angled to converge at a specific distance, often around 300 yards. Anything caught in that zone, a wing, a cockpit, an engine, would be utterly shredded. The heavy, high-velocity, 50 caliber slugs could punch through armor and shatter engine blocks. Luftwaffe ace Günter Röhl described facing this as industrial execution. It changed air combat from a skilled duel into an act of industrial annihilation. This firepower was mounted on an airframe that could take a terrifying amount of punishment. The P-47 was, without exaggeration, one of the toughest planes ever built. The cockpit was a veritable bathtub of armor plating. The air-cooled radial engine, as mentioned, could absorb hits that would have vaporized a liquid-cooled engine, and its sheer size meant enemy rounds could often pass straight through without hitting anything vital. The stories of the P-47's durability are legendary. The most famous is that of Major Robert S. Johnson. On June 26, 1943, Johnson's P-47 was ambushed and shredded by at least 21 cannon shells and hundreds of machine gun rounds. His canopy was shattered. His plane was on fire, and he was wounded. He tried to bail out, but the damaged canopy was stuck, trapping him inside the burning wreck. In a desperate dive, the flames miraculously went out. As he limped towards the English Channel, a lone FW-190 moved in for the kill. Unable to fight back, Johnson braced for the end. The German pilot made several passes, pouring fire into the helpless Thunderbolt. Finally, out of ammunition, the German pilot pulled up alongside the mangled P-47. He looked across at Johnson, rocked his wings in a salute to a man he thought was already a ghost, and turned for home. Johnson somehow flew that wreck, which had over 200 bullet holes, back to base. This was the Thunderbolt's second revelation. It wasn't just an engine. It was a fortress. Luftwaffe pilots, used to seeing targets disintegrate, now faced an enemy that simply refused to die. They'd pour ammunition into the giant American fighter, only to watch in disbelief as it stubbornly flew on. As Luftwaffe ace Heinz Baer famously said, the P-47 could absorb an astounding amount of lead. The laughter was gone. In its place was a growing sense of dread. They were fighting a monster. The P-47 was a weapon waiting for the right tactics. The early fumbles were the result of pilots trying to fight the Luftwaffe's game, a deadly mistake. But a new generation of shrewd commanders like Hubert Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group realized you don't send a heavyweight boxer to dance ballet, you teach him to use his power. The answer was a tactic as brutal as the plane itself. Boom and zoom. The doctrine was simple. Avoid turning dogfights at all costs. Instead, P-47 pilots used their engine's phenomenal high-altitude performance to climb above their opponents. From this perch at 30 feet or higher, they would scan the skies below for German fighters. And once a target was spotted, they would tip over and dive. And in a dive, the P-47 was untouchable. Its immense weight, a weakness in a climb, became its greatest asset. Gravity grabbed the 8-ton fighter and pulled it down with terrifying force. The Thunderbolt could reach speeds in a dive that would tear the wings off other aircraft pushing well over 500 miles per hour. At these velocities, the P-47 became a guided missile. The attack was swift and devastating. A P-47 would plummet out of the sun, its target often completely unaware until the sky erupted in tracers. The pilot had just a few seconds to line up a shot, squeeze the trigger, and unleash hell. Before the enemy could react, the Thunderbolt would be past him, using its incredible speed to zoom, climb back to altitude ready for another pass. There was no duel, no graceful exchange. It was a high-speed execution. This tactical shift transformed the P-47's effectiveness, making it the premier escort for the B-17S and B-24 seconds of the 8th Air Force. Now, German fighters had to fight their way through a ceiling of prowling Thunderbolts just to get near the bombers. By late 1943, German intelligence reports, which had initially dismissed the P-47, now identified it as a deadly threat. The aircraft itself was also evolving. One of the most significant upgrades was the bubble canopy. The original Razorback design had a huge blind spot to the rear, a fatal flaw. The new teardrop-shaped canopy gave the pilot an unobstructed 360 degrees view. Another game-changer was a new paddle blade propeller. Its wider blades bit into the air more effectively, dramatically improving the P-47's takeoff acceleration and, most importantly, its rate of climb. The sluggish Jug they had once mocked could now climb right along with them. With these improvements, the P-47 became a truly formidable fighter. It had the visibility and climb rate to complement its speed, firepower, and toughness. The days of laughing at the flying milk bottle were a distant, bitter memory. Now, when the Luftwaffe looked up and saw those bulky silhouettes circling high above, they felt a cold knot of fear. The sky was no longer theirs. As 1944 dawned, the new P-51 Mustang began to arrive in Europe. With its incredible range, the Mustang was perfect for escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back. For a lesser aircraft, this might have meant obsolescence, but for the Thunderbolt, it was the beginning of a second life, a new calling where its talents for destruction would be unleashed, with even greater ferocity, the role of the fighter bomber, or as the Germans came to call it in terror, the Jabo. The P-47's powerful engine meant it could carry a staggering payload up to 500 pounds of bombs. A load that rivaled some light bombers, plus an array of up to 105-inch high-velocity rockets. This transformed the high-altitude Hunter into a low-level angel of death. In the lead-up to D-Day, Allied air power was tasked with crippling the German war machine, and the P-47 was the perfect tool for the job. The effect was cataclysmic. Flying at treetop-level P-47s roamed across France, hunting anything that moved. Their targets were the arteries of the German army, railways, supply depots, and troop convoys. A flight of Thunderbolts could appear in seconds. Their 50 cows, ripping a column of trucks into a chain of burning wrecks. Their rockets could obliterate a tank. Their bombs could crater airfields. It was in this role that the P-47's legendary toughness became its most vital asset. Low-level attack is incredibly dangerous work, flying directly into a blizzard of ground fire. But the Thunderbolt's rugged airframe and air-cooled engine could soak it up and keep flying. P-47s would routinely return to base, riddled with holes, trailing smoke, yet their pilots were alive. As one common saying went, there isn't a P-47 pilot alive who wouldn't elect to belly one in rather than bail out. On D-Day, And in the brutal weeks that followed, the P-47 became the German soldiers' worst nightmare. German tank commanders who once ruled the battlefield were now paralyzed. Moving during daylight invited a swift and violent death from above. The distinctive roar of the R-2800 engine became a sound of impending doom, inducing a psychological condition among German troops known as Jabo fever. When the sound of a Thunderbolt was heard, soldiers dived for cover, knowing a storm was only seconds away. The statistics are staggering. From D-Day to VE Day, P-47 pilots would go on to claim the destruction of 8,600 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 6,800 trucks. They systematically dismantled the German logistical network, starving the front lines. As the German commander-in-chief in the West, Gerd von Rundstedt, bitterly complained, Allied air power led by the Jabos had made it impossible to conduct any meaningful troop movements. The joke had become a juggernaut. The story of the P-47's victory isn't just about technology or tactics. It's the story of a clash between two totally different philosophies of war. The German approach relied on a core of highly skilled, irreplaceable aces. The American approach was one of industrial, overwhelming force. The P-47 was the perfect symbol of this doctrine. The sheer number of Thunderbolts produced is hard to even comprehend. Between 1,941 and 1,945, Republic Aviation churned out over 15600 P-47s. At its peak, a new Thunderbolt was rolling off the assembly line every hour. This was an industrial tsunami the German war machine simply could not counter. While German factories struggled under constant bombing to produce a few hundred fighters a month, America was burying them under an avalanche of steel. This miracle extended to every part of the plane. Over 125,000 of the R-2800 engines were built not just by Pratt & Whitney, but by car giants like Ford and Chevrolet. This ensured a limitless supply of planes and spare parts. When a P-47 was damaged, it was often repaired and flying in days. When a German fighter was lost, its replacement was uncertain, and the loss of its pilot was a catastrophic blow. And the pilots themselves were another product of this industrial-scale approach. While the Luftwaffe's training program withered from fuel shortages and constant combat, the U.S. Army Air Forces built a vast training pipeline. Before ever seeing combat, an American pilot received hundreds of hours of flight instruction. In stark contrast, by late in the war, a new Luftwaffe pilot was lucky to have 100 hours of total flight time before being thrown into battle. The Americans weren't just building more planes. They were building more pilots, nearly 2,000 of them. The loss of a pilot, while a tragedy, was a replaceable cog in a vast machine. The final piece was logistics. The P-47 was a thirsty machine, but America's industrial might ensured that the high-octane fuel, the ammunition, and everything else was available in seemingly infinite quantities. This was the war the Luftwaffe could never win. They weren't just fighting the P-47. They were fighting the entire industrial capacity of the United States. The P-47 was the steel-tipped spear of a juggernaut that ground the Luftwaffe into dust through sheer, relentless attrition. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of World War II's most legendary aircraft, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We have plenty more stories of incredible machines and the brave people who flew them, and you won't want to miss out. By May 1945, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had carved its name into history. The plane once mocked as a flying milk bottle, a clumsy joke, had become a legend. It ended the war with an official kill-to-loss ratio of over 4, one having flown over 500,000 missions and destroying thousands of enemy aircraft and tens of thousands of vehicles. Its journey from underdog to dominator was a story of adaptation, of ruthlessly exploiting its strengths. It was a story of technological innovation, harnessing the power of a revolutionary engine to conquer the high-altitude frontier. And above all, it was a story of industrial philosophy, proving that wars are won not just by tactical brilliance, but by the relentless, overwhelming power of mass production. Perhaps the ultimate testament came from Germany's General of Fighters Adolf Galland. When asked what truly defeated the Luftwaffe, he didn't point to a single battle. He pointed to the sky over Germany, darkened by swarms of American fighters that could hunt his own pilots to extinction. The P-47 was the brutal instrument of that dominance. Its legacy lives on. The P-47's design philosophy, a heavily armed, incredibly tough aircraft built to support ground troops, has a direct spiritual successor. The Fairchild Republic, a 10 Thunderbolt II, better known as the Warthog. The story of the P-47 is a perfect reversal of fortune. It begins with laughter and ends with fear. It starts as a joke and finishes as a juggernaut. By May 1945, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had carved its name into history, ending the war with an official kill-to-loss ratio of over 4-1 and destroying thousands of enemy aircraft and tens of thousands of vehicles. Its journey from underdog to dominator was a testament to adaptation, technological innovation, and an industrial philosophy that proved wars are won not just by tactical brilliance, but by the relentless, overwhelming power of mass production. Perhaps the ultimate testament came from Germany's General of Fighters Adolf Galland, who pointed to the sky over Germany darkened by swarms of American fighters as what truly defeated the Luftwaffe. The P-47 was the brutal instrument of that dominance. Its legacy lives on a timeless reminder that in the deadly calculus of war, the most underestimated weapon can often become the most decisive.